enemies. We need enemies. Blood for the Blood God! 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 But we need more sacrifices. Herd the Imperial lambs to the slaughter. Bring Khorne his fill, or I'll wring...
Here's the one guy who's causing a problem, but it's only one guy who's ever caused the problem kind of a thing. And he's going to destroy the world, haha. No. In Warhammer, everybody's that one guy who's trying to destroy the world and take over the world.
Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Campaign Corner, your venue for all things tabletop. A chance to hear about the RPGs that you've played, with a different guest every episode. If you missed the last installment, you can find the link to it down below. Today's adventure is Naheer Lahdo, one of my frequent returning players across several campaigns. He'll be discussing a system that I haven't played, the Warhammer setting of D&D 5th edition. Let's roll initiative. Naheer, welcome.
I got a nat 20 on initiative.
So we played a lot of tabletop together, and what really brought Warhammer to light for me is that this is the one campaign that I know of that you played in that I wasn't involved in some way.
Right.
And like many people we know, I introduced you to tabletop. I mean, you've heard of it. You've watched some of our games. It started with Pathfinder.
Yeah.
So I guess my first question is, what is Warhammer?
That's a good question. A very vague one, but good one nonetheless, because there's a few different answers depending on what you want to find out about it. So there's two forms of Warhammer. There's Warhammer Fantasy. The original Warhammer came out in the 70s, 80s. And that was the original lore, the original setting. It's set on one specific world. It talks about the history of that world, and it goes back in that world's time, 15,000, what we would call 15,000 BC, up until their equivalent 2,000, 500-ish IC, is how they say RAD. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a 17,000 year time frame, and it talks about the events and happenstances of that specific world. But there is something that came out after in the late 90s, I believe it was 1998, is the Warhammer 40k universe, and that lore behind that. And that talks about a universal setting. That talks about space marines, there's different species that encompass entire galaxies, and they're far-reaching civilizations, sectors of the universe that are dedicated to certain species, and that one really deals with supernatural creatures such as gods and their abilities because of how big a universe is and how much of an impact that gods have on that kind of a setting. But that's the main difference between the two types of Warhammer. As for what Warhammer is just, for fantasy, it's you can boil it down to mankind's struggle to survive every single kind of detriment to their society.
I've been told that the Warhammer Fantasy setting really is a series of tragedies about mankind somehow surviving extinction several times over and over again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's crazy because one of the things they like to reference real life, you'll find if you go really deep in the lore. One of the things they like to reference is in the year 1111. That's okay. They had the Black Death, which was actually very close to, and it's 1111 AD kind of a thing. So it's close to the Middle Ages for when we had our Black Death. And what it was is 9/10 of the empire, which is the empire of man's population, at that time was wiped extinct by what they call the Black Death, set forth by another species called the Skaven, which are these rat people. And then it talks about everything they do to get out of that struggle. But that's not the only time that such a tragedy wipes out almost completely all of mankind. that's what the stories are based in, and that's where you get great warriors that are in the lore still prominent figures in the modern day. They're like the people who we would consider like, George Washington, Julius Caesar, those kinds of prominent figures always come out of these great tragedies.
How did you get involved in this particular campaign?
So in this particular campaign, I actually found out through my chorus class, my chorale we call it.
It's an unlikely beginning.
Yeah, so I found it through there, and I made a few friends my freshman year at Assumption College, and a few of the people in that chorale class just so happened to have a campaign already going. After knowing them for a while and overhearing them talk about D&D, which I had been playing at that time for about half of a year, which was in your Pathfinder game, I had asked them if I could join. It was about October. They said sure, so they decided we're going to make a character, and they asked me, what I want to do and everything. So I started off my character because I like to do unlikely combinations.
I've noticed.
I did this massive 6'7" huge Beastman Rogue. So
that's right. And so tell me a little bit more about your character. What was his name? What was his backstory? Let's really deep dive into what was his class.
I can't really remember his name, but one of the circulating ideas for what his name should be was based off of a green text. It was Sir Bearington.
That's right, the famous Sir Bearington post of the rogue bear who beats deception and convinces everyone that he's some kind of royalty.
Yeah. And it was so based off of that. The closest thing to that was becoming a beastman.
Mm-hmm.
One kind of like Bestigor is one of the species of beastmen in there. And he was this huge hulking mass of a bull man kind of a thing. Imagine a Minotaur, but because they have Minotaurs that are like actually 20 feet tall.
It's more like a Maxotaur at this point.
No, imagine like just a 6 foot tall Minotaur, this huge burly guy who's like 300 pounds, who tries to be super deceptive, and he tried to specialize in hiding the fact that he was a beastman. Beastmen are these creations of chaos, which is a no-no in the Warhammer universe. It's evil, like pure evil. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he's trying to go into a party who are dedicated to culling evil and vampires and chaos by any means, he was trying to like hide his way in and sneak his way in until finally they saw him for who he was, and hilarity ensued from there as we tried to not meta.
So what were some of the highlights of this campaign that you were in? What were either your own character or the things that happened around you?
There's a few things that happened. I know when I jumped in, there was a lot surrounding what they call the books of Nagash. Now, Nagash is the father of necromancy.
Okay.
He is a figure that is actually feared among all man and all species, as he pledged thousands of years ago to dominate over the world with an army of undead. He actually got so powerful he would constantly claim to challenge the gods and say he would be successful at them. He's died and came back to life, evading the clutches of the god of death more because of his ties with the dark magics and necromancy that he created. And he was so powerful that the empire he took over, he's called the Usurper. He took over the empire and then dominated the empires around him. He was so powerful that every single one of his enemies had to come together to defeat him. And even that was barely enough. His name still lives on in the whispers of the magics of death, on the winds of death. The thing with him is he wrote 9 books of necromancy. One of them is the Liber Necris and things like that.
Like a Necronomicon of sorts.
Yes, but there's 9 of them dedicated to explaining the happenstances and the nuances of necromancy.
Okay.
They're the greatest source of necromancy in all of the Warhammer Fantasy world. The thing with those books is they're so powerful that they're going to be an object for people to want to take and steal. Many of those people being vampires, being necromancers, and people who mess with the dark magics. So our campaign actually, some of it was based off of, I believe, the Liber Necris, one of his books. And we had to try and grab it out of the clutches of a grand necromancer, one of the arch necromancers. And so we had to fight him, and we did our best. I don't think we were successful. The vampires ended up obtaining this book. It was actually in the hands of Vlad von Carstein, one of the greatest vampires, who's very Dracula-esque.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. The von Carsteins resemble like the Dracula stereotypical vampire that you know and love. They actually ended up having the book, and they would summon masses of zombies and skeletons and beasts of the undead against the Empire of Man, which we were there to defend at the capital city of Altdorf. We had to actually defend against a siege on the main capital city. But against that book, we were struggling a lot. And a few things happened there, more key moments. I actually, as a beastman, a spawn of chaos, we must praise one of the chaos gods. Chaos gods are these evil entities in the warp, which is this, imagine like Abaddon. It's this place where usually evil things are formed based off of people's and mortals and sentient beings' emotions. It's a really cool system. So basically, these chaos gods are just the mass of people's emotions in the warp, which became a reality and became such an overpowering entity that they became gods. That's how, like, for example, rage and strength and like bravery and courage became the blood god, Khorne.
Blood for the blood god.
Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, and corn for the cornflakes.
It's the number one meme of Warhammer, if I haven't said so already.
Absolutely. And then we have a few more, we have three more actually, gods. Tzeentch, his name is weird, but he's the changer of ways. He's the god based on convoluted plans, fate, knowledge, wisdom, magic, and all those emotion amassed to create him. Slaanesh, the prince of excess. He bases, or he, she, it, they, whatever you want, because it's all subjective based off of which gender you desire. Slaanesh is actually the chaos god of excess, temptation, usually seduction, and things of that nature, but it also temptations and excess in drinking and things like that. Usually it is sex-based. And then finally, Nurgle, the Lord of Decay. And he is more embodying, the desire to elude death and, the desire to live. And he is seen as like the Plague Lord. For me, my character was a beastman. So he praised Khorne, the, fight him up kind of chaos god. And I got a nat 20 on praying to him for strength against the vampires on the city wall because they were kicking our ass,
Tremendous.
They were beating us because they were they're immortal beings who have lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. Of course, they're going to know how to kick some ass here and there. So they were really beating us into the ground, and I prayed to my god to give me a blessing.
Now, what did you roll for that specifically?
I rolled I was told to roll just a prayer.
Okay. So
just to, because we were, my GM was a little bit more lenient. I said, could I pray to my god to ask him for, some kind of bonus to help in this battle. And Khorne, being the god who loves conflict no matter what, and gains more power from it, absolutely will answer your prayers if you, roll good enough. But if you are so in the moment kind of a thing, if you're so willing to fight and kill for him, and not even just for him, even non-believers of Khorne can gain power can give him power just by conflict, by having an altercation.
That bloodlust is free.
Absolutely. So I rolled a nat 20 on praying to him, and I said, yes, I got it. I'm going to kick their ass. I'm going to turn the tides. And my GM, Eddie, he looks at me, and he likes to do this he likes to do this thing where he throws just a wrench in our cogs real quick. And he looks at me, and he laughs. And he says, Naheer, you know what a blood god will do with a nat 20 for a roll? And I say, what? He says, he'll make you his daemon prince. And I'm like, what? What a daemon prince is, if you don't know, is a chosen warrior by a chaos god.
So it's like an avatar.
Yes. So basically, he fills you with blessings and turns you into a demon. And makes you his bitch. And you're immortal. You spend all of eternity fighting for him. And he turned me into one. I turned into one of the worst ones as well, just because a random chance he picked one. I forgot which one I did get, but he turned me into like one of the worst ones. And he says, so give me your character sheet. You're now this Daemon Prince. You have imagine like these characters have like 30 health. He says you have well over 200 health. Your toughness, your AC is actually like 21 plus 25 or some ridiculous number. Your like CR is like 23, 24, 25, something crazy. And he says, yeah, you're going to kill anything that's nearest to you. And he says, on my turn, hey Naheer. I say, yes. He says, roll a D100. And I say, oh, okay.
That's
cool.
Never good.
So I roll a D100, I got a 91. I say, okay, so I do 91 damage. He says, no, that's how many people you kill.
We're just bypassing attack damage. We're literally just rolling for lives at this point.
Yes. I stopped. I looked at my army that we had defending the city, and I said, oh no. Killed 91 of them. At one point, I tried to avert an attack because I argued that I was so angry that I couldn't see anybody. So instead of rolling like an 80 another something crazy number, instead of killing the entire party in one fell swoop, I said, I'm going to attack the walls of the city. Instantly break the walls. There's a huge gash in the walls. Dead are coming through.
Just Kool-Aid Man right through there.
Dead are coming through. The party's trying to find a way to set me loose on the vampires and everything. And mind you, this is like also a night of this is the night of the dead where the moon is green and like all that, so they get enhanced powers. I forgot what it was called, but it's like one night a year where the dead are just crazy overpowered, and the moon turns green. I think it's a curse from Nagash that like lingers still. But the moon turns green and like the undead rise even without like necromancers and all that stuff. Eventually I died. I died like where the city wall broke.
Okay.
And I had a massive pool of blood. I was this hulking creature. The dead tried to go through, and the party made some perception checks, and they observed that the dead were burning as soon as they touched my blood, and that they died, and they couldn't come through. The vampires could jump through it, like jump over it, but the dead skeletons and all that would either have to climb the walls. They couldn't use this passageway. I died, but it was a crazy happenstance where I just turned into this hulking daemon and almost wiped out the party, like the third game I was in. Very similar things can happen if you fuck up magic. I'll give you an example.
Are you telling me that a positive nat 20 that benefited you can be a negative, like a 1 that someone rolled?
For like magic.
Wow, dude.
Maybe not as terrible.
Yeah.
Because demonic princes are like I am in favor of this chaos god, and I am his chosen warrior out of millions and millions of followers. So maybe not, But depending on the circumstances, if you're like fucking with dark magics and you're, let's say, doing it in a god's name, probably can. If you intentionally like abuse magic, if you use so much raw magic and try to absorb all the power. Now magic actually, before I get into the story, it works in a really funny way. So it's winds. They are winds. You have to usually weave almost like you're sewing with the winds to craft and create a spell for it to work harmoniously. That's good spellcrafting. Terrible spellcrafting, or rather the dark magics, they deal with willing, absolutely. They grip the magic by brute force and create through will the magic. It's an explosive, corrupt reaction. And they replenish. Actually, they diminish after you grab the winds. They diminish, but they replenish quickly. So if you're in an army setting, if your mages cast a spell, all the winds of magic for that, like whatever winds you used, in that area are gone for a second and replenish. Imagine like you take out one specific wave out of the ocean.
It's very abstract.
It's cool. It's really weird, but it's cool. And then imagine this. The more you use spells, the slower it replenishes in that area until it just doesn't replenish at all. And it works very much like winds do in our area. You know, some places have just really windy seasons, some places don't. That's when you have high winds and magic low. But here's the story. We were actually back on the siege in Altdorf when we were defending, before I turned into a massive demonic prince. Armies were coming forward of the undead. They were coming forward to attack the city. And then we asked one of the defending wizards, who we had very few at the time. He was an amber wizard, the ones of fire. We asked him to launch, a huge, massive fireball to try and attack, the necromancers, so that the armies fall. They kind of not decrepify, but diminish, and they dissolve back into just being dust and bones. So they don't have that life force, undeath force, driving them. So we asked him, hey, take out that necromancer for us. And he's a goofy guy. He's like, oh, I can do that in a jiffy, that's fine. He closes his eyes for a second, tries to cast the spell, nothing happens. We look at him and we're like, what? And then we see him levitate, probably 20 feet off the castle, or the parapet. His eyes roll back into his head, his skin starts shredding, and he blows up. You want to know what happened?
That's one way to go.
Chaos. Well, that's the fatality misfire of Tzeentch's curse. That's how bad it can get. So, how risky is magic? I don't know. You want to find out?
It's like, all I can think of is that South Park meme that would just be like, spell, wins, question mark, chaos. Now, how long was your total involvement in this campaign?
It would be approximately one whole semester.
Okay.
I actually ended up having to make a new character, obviously, and he actually... I have a very... fickle thing with turning into chaos demons. So.
Oh boy! All right.
So I turned. Long story short, I turned into a servant of Nurgle after accepting treatment and trying to guard the city from Nurgle's invasion and weed out the corruption.
Was this your second character?
This was my second character.
Okay.
He was like a paladin of the sun cult or something. I forgot what it was. He wielded a halberd, or a flamberge that was flaming, and it was holy, and it was blessed by Sigmar, one of the gods, the main god for the empire. And he actually was befallen by Nurgle's curse because while trying to defend the city, he was attacked. His arm was about to come off, and then one of the doctors said, I have some magics that could help you, but they're not accepted in practice. And then I said, fuck it, let's do this. And then I got turned into a chaos being. And, I had my sanity and everything, but I just thought everybody who was with Nurgle, I didn't think they were bad guys anymore. No, they were pretty just cool dudes, Actually, they're my friends, and I will defend them. If need be, I will kill for them. So.
That is one confused paladin.
Yeah, so that was that semester, and then a bit into the second semester, about 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and it ended up ending because at the end of the year, they graduated. The GM graduated.
Mm-hmm. So how did this party form in World? What were some of the other characters around you like?
Right, so we had a pit fighter. His name was Nax.
Nice.
I can't remember the other people's names, but we also had this priestess of Mor. So she was one of the high priestesses. She was Mor, again, is the god of dead. So he reaps people's souls. He takes them to the afterlife, that kind of a thing. She, as a priestess of Mor, she had a connection with him. So she would actually get visions. Every night she would go to sleep and kind of call upon her god to receive a message from Mor. Then there was, oh Lord, if I can remember, we had an amber mage. Amber is the kind of magic that deals with animals, if I remember correctly.
Interesting.
Yep, amber, which is the brown wind. So there's different winds of magic. The one for the beasts is brown. It's called amber. in the magical colleges for mankind in the Empire. So that's the Amber School. She was an Amber Mage. She learned the lore of the beasts. She had a familiar. I forgot which or what animal it was, but she had a familiar that would always help out. I think it was this dog. It was this cute little puppy that could breathe fire.
It's very out of place.
It was so funny. It had its moments, but we also had so we had the pit fighter next. Who he wielded knuckles. The priestess of Moor. She did spells of like usually clerical spells. The Amber Mage. She was like imagine a druid. Mm-hmm. We also had an archer. She was a high elf. She was actually a princess high elf. So she had an entourage of security guards she was always trying to get rid of. So she was always she was like, come on guys, I need a vacation. Fuck off. And she would like constantly run away. At one point they finally like, oh my god, princess, we found you. We can't ever leave you anymore. And then she's like, God, fine. As long as you like stay 50 feet away. Like here's a restraining order like on my own security guard entourage. And then we had a few more people. I can't remember exactly what they were. We also had a few NPCs following the party. One guy, he was like I believe he was a gunslinger or something. He was this like younger kid who was also an elf. He was like blonde. And he ended up dying. And everybody loved him because he got the best rolls whenever we failed. So he ended up getting like 19s, 18s, 20s all the time. And he ended up dying. And we went apeshit. And we got good rolls to to take revenge on his killing.
Basically an anime episode.
Absolutely. So that was basically the party. And we would always interact with people like Karl Franz, the emperor of the empire. Inarguably, he is the greatest general and statesman of his time. So we ended up interacting with him. He called me a filthy beastman after I tried to save him from Vlad von Carstein. He's like, I can see through your disguise, beastman. And yeah.
That must have been an awkward interface.
I just told him, I am willing to serve. like this kind of a thing. I will do my best to defend you. And he's like, make sure you defend me. And he was basically like, make sure you don't fuck up. Like that kind of
He's not giving you any breaks.
Mm-mm. And we also talked with the Grand Theogonist, the Grand Patriarch. He was the Theogonist, Balthasar Gelt. And if you don't know what that name is, you should. Because he is a wizard of gold, which it's the school of gold. He is so distinct because he's one of the greatest wizards in his class, or in his field, so to say, in that area. He's so great, but one of the things that makes him distinguishable from everybody else, besides his pure skill, is that he actually had an accident in one of his experiments where something blew up and it splattered all over his face and his hair stood up. So now his face is all gold, doesn't move, and his hair spikes up in a kind of Guy Fieri-esque sense, but not really. It's more like imagine a crown that like just goes straight up on like the tip of the forehead kind of a thing. Goes around the head.
Interesting.
Yeah, you should look up a picture if you can. He's one of the most distinguishable characters in all of Warhammer. And that's what we were surrounded by. We were always trying to fight off, our main enemies were, the vampires. So we were always trying to root out corruption, but also chaos invaders. We were always trying to fight them as well.
Now, did your GM set up any kind of long-term antagonist that you guys were kind of on the warpath to meeting?
Well, Warhammer does in itself, not that we could see, really. It was just, the forces that be. So, like, the entire vampire counts, the entire army of chaos. But Warhammer in itself, when you decide you will go to war and your antagonists are this species, they have their antagonists. They have their, like, big bosses, the final bosses, whatever. If you choose to go to war against chaos, you're looking at, Archaon the Ever-Chosen. You're looking at all of the cults of the Chaos Gods. You're looking at all the corruption that is in the cities. So you're looking at, huge organizations. If you're talking about, vampires and undead, Well, it depends which familial lineage of vampires you're talking about. There's 5 different ones. I can get into that in a second, but they all semi-work together, but they're all different in their own sense. But if you're looking at that, you're looking at people like Vlad von Carstein, Manfred von Carstein, all of the von Carsteins as these big political leaders because they own the area, the vampire counts. They own that empire and the province of Sylvania. They are the official heirs. So you're looking at those guys, which are huge, huge, huge players in themselves, but also Nagash, the father of all necromancy who survived, after 3 deaths. He's come back to life so many different times, and he's resurging constantly. He set up an empire that will last an eternity. You're looking at rooting out, that out of something that's so integrated into the very fabric of reality. And there's just so many different options for that. Because those 2 were what we were specifically going after, that's what we would have gotten to. Obviously, we didn't really know that at the time. But, I mean, you can also have your conflicts with, like, greenskins. They're always warring and rampaging. Grimgor, Ironhide, he's a big orc boss. He's an ogre boss. They always lead Waaggs, or these big, like, imagine, like, crusades. Those are, like, the Waaggs, Waaagh is a very fickle term. It's used a lot, vaguely among the goblins and the greenskins. So to lead a Waaagh is this huge army it's like a crusade against something. Fun fact.
So it's like an orc jihad, you're saying?
Yes. Abso-fucking-lutely. The funny thing is, actually, one time in the lore, there was 2 orcs that were leading 2 huge armies that were about to topple the dwarves. One of them was called the Unstoppable, and the other was called the Unmovable. And obviously, when you have these 2, they have their names, but the Unstoppable and the Unmovable with their titles. Obviously, when you have these 2 trying to collude with each other, and orcs being big dum-dums, they're like, we go there, eat human, like that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. When you have these 2 big dum-dums trying to go and, like, form and collude into forming this one huge army. No collusion. Yeah. You know what happened? They disagreed about what their Waaagh was going to be named. They killed each other before they could attack the doors. They destroyed both each other's armies.
Classic orcs.
You know what that hill is called about all the dead bodies, with all the dead bodies for the orcs?
What?
Green Hill. But that's what, like, a Waaagh is. And then also, like, there's, for magics, for example, there's, like, lore of the big Waaagh, which is, like, orc magic, and lore of the little Waaagh, which is, like, goblin magic, exclusively. And it's just, Waaagh is just this term of, like, and, like, any feeling that comes about that. So Warhammer in itself has so many different varieties of who's going to fuck you over, who's going to try and kill you, even other men, the Empire isn't all like one big happy family. Mm-hmm. Maybe Bretonnia, the very totalitarian French, kind of settlement of man. They're very like Lady of the Lake, but we're also like 9/10 of your income goes to the king, like kind of a thing. Even if you're a peasant, actually 9/10 of the grain is tax. So they're very totalitarian. Way more than anybody in human history. So it's crazy, like everybody wants a piece of you, and it's dog eat, rabid chaos dog, eat rat dog.
That breathes fire.
That breathes fire.
So would you say that, in your experience, Warhammer Fantasy, the campaign that you played in, was more homebrew or more pre-existing Warhammer lore?
Definitely. It was a lot of pre-existing lore, because that's the foundation of everything, You can't really deviate from a world that you've chosen to follow the rules and abide by those rules. It's like me saying, I'm going to base my campaign on the real world physics, and now I can just, for whatever reason, every time I jump, gravity doesn't mean anything. Like, no, you got to follow those rules. You got to, abide by that lore, You have to follow that history, and it is very, very important. A lot of the interactions that we've had were based off of lore, But our contribution was all homebrew. What our adventure was entirely made. the siege of Altdorf was a thing that happened from the vampires against, humanity, but there wasn't a big daemon prince that spawned for no fucking reason, that broke down the tower, and that, is marked in the history books. That, and that kind of stuff just doesn't happen in the lore. Otherwise, he would have been like, no, you can't do that. No. But that would make the game fun. So a lot of what we did was homebrew. It was just our own personal adventure, super heavily based off of the lore. As for the mechanics, though, what we decided to do was, what the GM decided to do was, he said that he would take the rolling system of 5e because of its simplicity and use every other, like, wounds and everything, all that kind of, like, magic and all those systems, use the Warhammer game and use that in its stead. So it was a hybridization of trying to keep it very similar to Warhammer and its original system, respecting that, but also ease of the players learning this whole new rolling system that was so obscure and settled with 5e. They all know it, and I actually learned through them what 5e was.
From what you stated, Warhammer is really the story of a bunch of gods coming out of the woodwork to destroy mankind.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It is. That is cause for the adventures that you have. They're very, tragedy, let's solve it, instead of like, let's try to do our own thing.
It's definitely not a mystery game. It's definitely not a kingdom building game. It's like the opposite of a kingdom building game.
It's a kingdom destroying to build up your kingdom game.
Now that you've gotten this campaign under your belt, what would you say are the most major differences between Warhammer Fantasy and some of the other settings that you've played?
Well, because of, just where you are, you can kind of take a social psych analytical point of view about this by saying your surroundings and your world that you are living in as a character, obviously, that world is shaping your adventure for you. It's shaping you as a result of that. My experience with that is just so conflict driven, like you were talking about, which is not a bad thing by any means. It can be a great thing at times, but it's different. It's very, very different. Instead of the regular D&D-esque, here's a quest, let's go on this quest, and all the complications, and because we go on the quest, or here's the one guy who's causing a problem, but it's only one guy who's ever caused a problem, kind of a thing, and he's going to destroy the world, haha. No, in Warhammer, everybody's that one guy who's trying to destroy the world and take over the world. It's so explorative, it's so free. I love that. I love being able to make my own decisions. A lot of the other campaigns I've been in, and sometimes it can be very focused and driven, which is a great thing. But if you kind of, if you're kind of in the grind in that one thing, it gets very tiring. So that was the different experience that I had, especially with a Warhammer-driven game.
Alright guys, and with that, thanks for tuning into this edition of Campaign Corner. Please like and comment if you enjoyed today's episode. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the different tabletop systems you've played. And remember,
blood for the blood god,
skulls for the skull throne, and
corn
corn
for the cornflakes.